Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to The Way Station. This is Season 2, and I am your host, Rebecca Darren Ellis. Nobody in particular, and also just like you. In every episode of The Way Station, we explore first-person stories, each told on a common theme, but from vastly diverse perspectives. We'll introduce you to everyday real people whose lives are seemingly different than yours. Or are they? Perhaps through these stories, you may find that you and me and he and she and they and them are more alike than we're willing to admit. And now a quick thank you to those that make this show possible, my friends at Pioneering Collective. This podcast is powered by Pioneering Collective, an executive thought leadership firm combining personal PR, coaching, and networking to transform hard-earned wisdom into heavyweight impact. Learn more at pioneeringcollective.com. So, in today's episode of The Way Station, we talk about reinvention. This is a really cool episode because this one has a lot of super great tips and tactics that you can take away to really think about your life in a way such that you are constantly learning and evolving, and that if you are unhappy with the way that your life is right now, there is always something that you can do moving forward that can bring you to that place of feeling like you are in your most authentic self, in living your most authentic life. So today we speak with poet Scott James, and he reads us a poem called Reinvention that he wrote based on this episode. And one thing that is really sticking out for me is the very first line, which is to begin again is to be again. Really beautiful when you think of it in the context of your own life and think about how many times you've had to start over, how many times you feel like you may have backtracked or gone so far only to take multiple steps back. I know I felt that way after the pandemic. Felt like my life was just like grooving and going and going. I was, having my first baby. I was living my life. And I was also just like really growing as a person. And that just kind of threw me for a loop, as it did many of us. However, we're a couple of years into it, and I think about the reflections and the things that I've learned, and I am truly coming more home to myself. So to begin again is to be again. Thank you so much, Scott, for that. We also speak with Mrinalini. We're so sorry about that, but she's such a lovely person who really, and you'll realize that I paused because there are several times in this episode that we mispronounced her name. She's such a lovely person who really took it all in stride. She expressed such courage in the actions that she took over her lifetime, moving here from India with 2 suitcases and just sort of experimenting with her life and seeing, is this the path that I want to go to? And getting very sick at a certain point and realizing that sickness was also stemming from an unhappiness in her life, and then taking the actions to move into a better life, a better way for her. And what was really expressed through her story is that there is, even though you feel like, oh, I'm just in a totally different direction now, where am I going? That if you look back in hindsight, you can see that there is this thread in your life that always essentially told you who you are and what's most important to you and what you're meant to be doing. And then we spoke to Zia, who brought up the idea of being a multi-potentialite, which I have never heard before, but apparently there are books on this, and I should probably read them because it really struck home for me. The fact that you can do and you can be many things in your lifetime, and no matter what people are trying to tell you, that you have to pick a lane and you have to go for it, and the only way to succeed is if you stick to one thing. That's not true, especially if you are a curious person like Zia and like me. And what does it really mean to express yourself creatively? The format can be different. You can be, in my lifetime, an actor, a bartender, an executive assistant, now director of storytelling, a coach, all of these things. You can be all of these things, and all of these things are true because all of these things are within you, and they are just the different ways that you express yourself, and that's totally okay. I'm really excited for you to listen to this episode because, as you can tell, I'm kind of jazzed up right now. It is a really inspiring episode, and I hope that you will all be able to relate. Help me welcome to The Way Station Scott James, Zia Hassan, and Mrinalini Gadkari, 3 very real people with very true, very honest, very real stories about their experiences with reinvention. I hope you can relate. I'm so excited to have in the Way Station with me today, Zia, Scott, and Mrinalini. I'm very excited to have you all here to talk about reinvention. This is actually going to be the last episode of the season, so let's just jump into it. Scott, we'll start with you. Scott Andrew James is a poet who believes in everyday magic and the healing power of creativity. He was born in Waukesha. Waukesha, Wisconsin. I am learning so many new things on this episode. And now lives in Austin, Texas with his amazing wife, wise toddler, and a loving pug. Whenever you're ready, Scott, we'll love to hear your story.
Yeah. Well, it's very good to be here. Thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's good to meet everyone else on the call. I'm excited to hear your stories. I'm actually going to start mine with a poem. So I'm going to start at the end. And this is a poem that I wrote last night for this podcast, and it's called Reinvention. To begin again is to be again. Not so much something new, but some you that is more true. To find the soft wind moving across the insistent mud of existence and let myself say, yes, again, I am free. Yes, again, I am me. And this time, we shall see. This time, we shall see. So that is an example of what I do. I put watercolor and old school typewriter words on these little pieces of paper. And now that I have reinvented myself, this is what I do with it. But I'll take you back to around 2015, which is where my story of reinvention begins. And I was working at an office at a publisher here in town, here in Austin. And I had been there for about a year, and I was not quite 40, and I was miserable. So anybody out there who has found themselves working at an office and not happy about it, I hear you. I was there doing what I thought was going to be a really, really good job. I was a branding director for a publisher and working with authors, helping them turn their books into really beautiful, basically from idea to book. And I actually did enjoy the work. What I didn't enjoy was all of the things that came with the work. So I found myself extremely enraged, I would say, at morning traffic, screaming at people from my car, and then wondering why I was reacting that way. I found my energy very low, and I found my spark really going dim. And I think probably a lot of people identify with that. And I realized in the winter of 2015 or so that something really needed to change big time. And I was listening to a lot of different podcasts and a lot of different speakers. And I found this guy, Chris Guillebeau, which some people on this podcast may have heard of. He's done like the $100 startup and various other things. And I don't remember how I found him, but I know that he was the one who said something about setting a goal that involves a number, a SMART goal. And it really resonated for me at the time. And so I dug back into my mind and my heart, and I said, what is the thing that makes me happy? What is the thing that brings me alive? And it had been poetry, always. And this is something that I had done from a very young age. When we did sleepovers, when I was a little kid, I was the one who would invent stories to tell, essentially around the fire, but it was around the TV. When I was in high school, I was the one who did the handwritten cards. When I was in college, I was making zines, but I always did it on the side. And I had tried to get into grad school for poetry, and I got denied, or I didn't get accepted. It sent me off on a sideways path. And so I realized, all right, this is the moment. I think I need to return to this. And so the goal that I set for myself was I want to write and give away 1,000 poems in a year, which is exactly in line with what this guy, Chris Guillebeau, said, which is make it ambitious, make it big enough that you're going to have to change how you live your day and how you live your week and how you live your month to accomplish it, but not so big that it's unaccomplishable, and also not so small that you can do it in a few days. So I thought, well, this is doable, as many of you are doing. I was like, it's 3 a day for a year. And so I just sort of made that guess with the urging and support of my wife, who is indeed very amazing and had always said, if you are a poet, you should write more poems. And she was right. So I started out, and the first thing I did was I would just wake up every day and start writing poems. And I got to, let's say, mid-January. and I had written about 80, and I ran out of ideas. The first lesson that this idea of reinvention, or this attempt at reinvention, taught me is that I don't have an infinite number of ideas. At first, that made me very sad because all the failure beasts came in, and I thought, this is not going to work. And so I despaired for a few days. And then I thought, all right, I'm going to call my brother. I'm going to call my uncle. I'm going to call my friend and ask them for an idea. Maybe they'll have an idea for a poem. They all said, you want a what? Essentially, they gave me an idea, but they had no context for what I was doing. So I thought, all right, this isn't working either. I can't just sort of insert myself into people's lives and say, all right, stop everything you're doing and give me an idea for this poem. Where can I find people who are in the mood to do this? And so I found myself walking around my neighborhood, just sort of looking and wondering, where can I go? And I found myself I was in East Austin, is where I was living, and I found myself at a food trailer park. And I sat down and I struck up a conversation with somebody who had a food truck. And it turns out she was brand new. And I said, would you mind can I just set up next to your truck with this typewriter? And she said, yeah, of course. That sounds great. And so to me, it was like kismet. It was like, okay, I found my place. And I sat down, and for many days, many weekends in a row during the spring, in February and March, I sat down and I would just write poems, and people would order, and then they would come over and get a poem from me, all for free. And then I would type the poem on the spot, read it to them, give it to them, and they loved it. And I loved it. And I found that my depression and my sort of despair started to lift. But also what happened is people started to come back, or they would find me and they would say, can you come and do this at my party? Can you come and do this at my daughter's wedding? Can you come and do this at my company? And I started to get invited to do things. And I realized quickly that while I might get 8 or 10 opportunities in a Saturday afternoon at this food truck, when I went to a party, I would get a line. That was the moment. When I went to a wedding, I would get all the kids and all the people who were like, I'm not really that into this wedding for 5 hours. I'm going to go over to the guy who's writing poems, and we're going to invent something on the spot. And slowly but surely, I started to realize that I had come out of the hole that I was in emotionally, and I was starting to seek out these opportunities. I realized there was a way to connect. So I realized that my reinvention, that was the second lesson that I learned, was number one, I do not have infinite ideas. Number two, the solution to that is connection, is finding these opportunities. And so I was still on my 1,000 poem journey. And by the time I came to May or so, I was in the 300 or 400s. So I'd written many hundreds of poems, and I was starting to get into a groove. I had my favorite typewriter, and I saw that Chris Guillebeau had the World Domination Summit. So this is his sort of annual summer. I don't know if he does it anymore after the pandemic, but it was out in Portland. And so basically I contacted him. I said, I do this thing. You inspired me. And I didn't hear from him, but I heard from his team, and I got invited to the World Domination Summit I think it was in June or July, to be part of their sort of entertainment experience. And so I found myself, I timed it out, and I wrote poem number 500 at the conference, which for me was like a crowning achievement. It felt like I am being invited to the source, back to the beginning. And it made me feel like I'm no longer someone who is like a publishing consultant that writes poems on the weekends. Now I am a poet who also has a job as a publishing consultant. And soon after that, I actually left that job, and I jumped on this idea of being a poet, and I built it up. I hit my 1,000th poem that fall, and in November, and I did it sort of a performance with an improv troupe downtown Austin. And so that's one example of more connections that have continued to grow ever since then. But that was the final lesson for me, was that in reinvention, the question that I found myself asking was, what's primary? So I had always thought, I either need to be only a poet, and I'm a failure if I'm not Kerouac or any number of folks that I idolized when I was younger. And I had realized, no, I don't need to be a self-destructive creative who writes poems and, drinks too much on the weekend. I can be someone who is a poet who also does other things. And that put me in the sort of class of what I would consider, really amazing poets like Frank O'Hara or William Carlos Williams, who had jobs and wrote incredible poetry. And so that was the outcome of my reinvention. And I've spent the last 5, 6, 7 years just finding as many opportunities to connect and do this process, this instant poetry, take a suggestion from a person and turn it into a poem and be a vessel for sort of the creative wind that flies all around the world. And that was my story of reinvention. And the despair has not caught up with me.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was awesome. I have so many notes here and I don't even know where to start in terms of what I really loved. I mean, well, first off, you can tell you're a poet. What was that last thing you said? The vessel that something on creative wins. And also thank you for sharing your poem to start with us. I love the very first line, to begin again is to be again. It's just so beautiful. And really kind of thinking about the root of reinvention. What is the thing that makes me happy? What is it that brings me to life? And not defining it by any one thing that you have to be. Like you said, I am a poet who does other things. And I've always hated the idea of side hustles, B jobs, like all of that thing, like, you know, the job to pay my rent. I don't like hustle culture altogether. You put it so well when you talked about you don't have to be just the one thing. And if you're not that one thing, you're a failure otherwise. I also applied for grad schools. It was in theater. And of course, being the perfectionist I am, I was like, I'm only going to Juilliard or Yale. These were like my safety school was the new school. It was like a really, really great high expectation. And then I got waitlisted for my safety school. So I really relate to this idea that we're given that if we are not making our primary income from that creative endeavor or from our art, then we are otherwise a failure. But you're right. Think of how many writers are drunks. They really were, and just ruined their lives or stole ideas from their wives. And that's, a whole other episode, right?
Sure.
But I'd love to hear from Zia and Mrinalini. Love to hear your thoughts. Whoever wants to go first.
Thank you for sharing, Scott, your journey. It is so inspiring. My belief is that if you really want something, you make it happen. If you're not aware of what you want, then you will never live your potential. So I'm really impressed how you, even though you got stuck after writing 300 poems, you reached out to figure out that there must be a way. You wanted to explore, and then you had this idea and you sat by the food truck and did your thing. And you basically have proved that you don't have to be a starving artist. You can be creative and you can make a living. And you can be happy, you can be joyful, and you could be doing other things. So your story is really very inspiring.
Something that really sparked in my mind when you were speaking is around the idea of how poetry to me, and I also write poetry and lyrics. You can see I have these guitars on my wall here, so I'm a songwriter. So I relate to that. It's putting together sometimes two separate ideas that may have never been connected before and putting them together in a new way. And what better way is there to describe the idea of reinvention than taking two what used to be separate ideas, two separate things, and putting them together? The idea of, you put it, creating something new at a wedding. Let's invent something together right here on the spot and come up with an idea on the spot. The type of skill that I think lends itself well to anyone that wants to learn to reinvent themselves in a more effective way, or start again, or begin again, as you put it so aptly. And then the second thing I wanted to just is a recommendation that I'm sure this creator, if you know Chris Giobo's stuff, is Austin Kleon. Are you familiar with Austin? Okay, yeah, I see other head nods too. I read his newsletter every week. I any interview he ever does, I am just blown away by all his books, Steal Like an Artist, but particularly all the way back his newspaper blackout stuff, which he basically took a newspaper, for those who haven't seen his work, and would black out all the words except for the ones he wanted to keep, and figured out, oh, that's a form of poetry. And that kind of, vaulted him into his career now, where he's sort of like a curator and still does creation too. So if those of you out there are inspired by what Scott was talking about, definitely check out Austin. I think you'll be inspired by him as well.
Yeah, I think I do love Austin Kleon's newsletter as well. I've been getting it for years. Yeah, he's inspiring and also based in Austin. So that's kind of cool. But that makes it, the most enduring idea of the poet is a diarist locked away in a room, like any writer, or the self-destructive, the drunk poet. And one of the biggest mindset shifts that was it overlapped, like the despair, the depression, and also the creative rebirth was this idea of communicating with the world rather than just sort of hunched over on a piece of paper, which I love from his newspaper Blackout Poetry as well. And any of that, just saying like, well, what's around? Let's invent. So it's sort of meta reinvention, but let's create from what's floating here.
I also want to point out that note that you made, or that was evident from your story, that you can use connection as a way to spark ideas, because I think that there is that fear for a lot of creatives that at some point they are going to, and literally you hit a wall and ran out of ideas. But once you start engaging with other people, like those sparks start coming again.
Yeah,
maybe too many.
It's maybe too many. Yeah, I hit that wall and then I realized, well, if I can get through that fear, there's an infinite number of ideas because there's an infinite number of people that I can go meet. There's an infinite number of situations that I can step into, companies I can work with, colors I can paint with, words I can start with, et cetera, et cetera. And this was my vehicle for exactly that, for realizing, it doesn't have to spring from me. It can be part of it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think of it as the creative wind.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
So now we're going to move on to Mrinalini.
That was perfect.
Oh man, don't
jinx
don't
it.
get too excited yet. Yeah, don't jinx it. But a little bit about her first. America's only career coach for South Asian professional women. Dr. Mrinalini Gadkari tracks South Asian women's careers, even if their bosses do not think they are ready for the next level. I'm really interested to hear about this. So whenever you're ready, would love to hear your story.
So I am the first in my family to come to the US or any country outside of India, basically. And I came here, I was rebellious, I was a physician. I realized I do not like being a doctor and I wanted to explore what's in store for me. And I was this person on adventure who wanted to figure out what it is. And I left my home country. My family was not very happy about me leaving the country and coming somewhere else. And the condition was that, I should get married first and then go. Well, I did that. And then I came to the US. And of course, the marriage was not my choice. It was not my interest. But I'll tell about it in just a little bit. But I came to the US, got assimilated in the new culture. I started with things like understanding, even though my education was in English, I did not understand what people were speaking here. The slangs, the idioms, things like people asking, hey, what's up? And me literally looking up and answering fan, light, sky, I don't know. And struggling through that, but eventually understanding the culture, getting acclimated to the culture, the people here, worked in the most amazing organizations. I worked at Johns Hopkins, Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Ohio State University. I changed my career multiple times. First I was a physician, then I became a hospital administrator, a leadership coach, and then a business professor. And for everyone who was looking at my life from the outside, they probably thought I made it. Like I came here with 2 suitcases and then I had a home of myself and I was making 6 figures and everything looked perfect. Nobody knew how miserable I was living that life. I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. All I was going after was the definition of success as imposed on me by others. And probably they weren't even imposing on me, but that's what I saw. Like you come to the US, you work in the best organizations, you make a lot of money, you have your own house and picket fence and all of that. I had all of that, but there was no joy in my life. And I kept ignoring it. And then universe gave me a nudge. One day I came back home from work. At that time I was working as a business professor. I came back home and I lay in bed and I just could not get up. I just couldn't move. I was so exhausted. And then the next day, lots of joint pains, no explanation, went to multiple doctors. They couldn't explain anything. Then somebody diagnosed me with Sjogren's disease, which is an autoimmune disorder. Basically means in 5 or 6 years, my life would be miserable and I would rather die than live. That was my nudge. That was my call to reinvent my life and really question what I was doing. So after I was diagnosed with Sjogren's disease, I explored all of the resources that might be there. And I went to one support group. And I mean, lots of love, lots of power to them that they went through it. But I went there and I just thought my future was so bleak. And they were talking about, oh, this is how it's going to be. This is how life is going to turn out. And I couldn't stay in that room. I had to leave because I was not ready to accept that that was my future. And then thankfully, I knew an amazing Ayurvedic doctor in India. We got on the call. I was in tears and I asked him, can you do something for me? And he said, I've got you. And that itself was such a relief. And then he sent me some herbal medicines, told me about lifestyle changes. And then the question that I had to ask was, okay, I would like to reinvent, but where do I even start? Because all I knew was, being in healthcare, working in healthcare organization. And then as a business professor, of course, I worked with students in all industries. But then where do I start? So my first thing was to resign. So I resigned. I had no interest in going back and coming back home and being exhausted again. So I thought, well, let me just make a list of all the things that I love to do. And I made a list and I wrote down, well, I love cooking. And at that time I had become a vegan. And I thought, well, maybe I can start organic farming. And that summer that I resigned, my backyard became into an organic garden. And it's a lot of work. And it did not work for me with the sun and everything. So I can't be a farmer. Then I thought, well, maybe I should start a vegan Indian food truck. And I thought, I loved that idea. And then I attended some workshops. And at that time, I was living in Columbus, Ohio. And they had great support system for entrepreneurs, small businesses. And they had all these free workshops. And I attended those, created a business case. But when it actually came to doing it, I thought, I don't know if I want to do dishes. I don't know if I want to do the cleaning. All I like to do is just cook. And anything else, I hate it. And if I had to start that business, I would have to do a lot of things on my own. And plus the winter in Columbus, Ohio and driving the food truck, I crashed it. So the next thing was I realized that I loved writing resumes and I helped people on the side, did not charge them for that, but I was great at it. So I thought, well, maybe I should just start a resume writing business. And I did that. And I got some responses, not a lot, but the responses that I got, they had more questions than just their resume. It's like, well, how do I answer these questions in the interview? Well, how do I write my cover letter? How do I negotiate my salary? Well, I don't feel confident at work. I don't speak up. And I thought, wow, this is great. And as I looked back, I could see that common thread in my life. Even as a doctor, the one thing that I loved doing was coaching my patients. So I would get a lot of patients who belong to low socioeconomic status. They would be maids or very poor. And they would come to me and I would actually sit with them and I would draw a picture of a heart, the aorta, and talk about this is how you get blood pressure. And I can write you a prescription. But if you are open, you can also maybe start walking in the morning, start jogging in the morning, and you can come back in a few weeks and we can check your blood pressure. And of course, they would feel better and all of that. And of course, I would choose what patients can benefit from that. And then when I came to the US, that was that common theme, coaching people, how to take charge of their processes, how to lead as a leader, how to overcome the inhibitions about speaking, doing presentations and all of that. And that suddenly lit me up. And I thought, yes, this is exactly what I want to do. And even as a business professor, that's exactly what I was doing. And then everything came in place. And then I started my business. Initially, I was working with everybody, men and women. Then I thought maybe I should focus on women healthcare. Then I thought maybe I should focus on physicians. And then I thought, wow, when I came here as an immigrant, I had so many challenges. Being a woman of color, worried about my accent, not really understanding how to respond, especially if there are people who are domineering, dominating, toxic, not knowing how to really deal with them. I had been through all of that and I had shut myself down. And I thought, wow, won't it be nice? Because I have overcome all of that. How about I help all these women who look like me, who never had a mentor who looked like me, because I never had a mentor who looked like me. So I decided to become that mentor for them. And one of the commonest things I have heard from immigrant women, Asian professionals, is that their bosses are very happy with their work. So they will give them lots of compliments. Wow, I don't know, Mrinalini, what will I do without you? I'm so glad you're on this team. But when it came to the real recognition, promotion, usually a male would get promoted. I thought this is where my niche is. And that's what I decided. So I work now exclusively with South Asian professionals and really help them become or be seen as that leadership material where they can be seen and respected as leaders and get promoted. So even if their bosses feel you're not ready, I help them become ready and take charge of their careers and move ahead. And as a result of that, they are negotiating more than $30,000 to $70,000 more than what they're making. They're getting promoted. They're landing jobs they did not even think they possibly could. And that just fills my heart. And I'm so glad that I took this path, which I had to figure it out for myself. It was a long, winding path, but now I help women achieve that in a short amount of time and be fulfilled and happy in their career while making the kind of money they deserve.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really relate to this definition of success being imposed by others. And even though you said, it might have been something that you imposed on yourself and not directly said to you by family members or friends, I think that especially in the States, it's everywhere. Right? It's in our culture. It's in the media. It's a message, even if it's not a message within your home. Steps towards the first thing that I actually wrote down was what courage it took for you to come here with your 2 suitcases, like what courage it took for you to take all of those different steps towards finding the thing that you actually want to do, even from a place of you're sick and trying to figure out what it is to make yourself better, to look beyond just what's happening to you physically and what is medically necessary for you and say, oh, my whole life needs to change. And you talked about this thread that you can now see throughout your lifetime that led you to this latest reinvention. And I'm thinking about how when you're in it, like when you're in the thick of it, when you're in that depression, that fatigue of, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm so unhappy and I don't know why. That thread can be so hard to see. And you're like, I don't even think that I'm on the path anymore. And then there's just this part of you that says, let me just take one step. Let me just take one small action. And taking that one small step, that one action leads you to the next and gives you that hindsight to be able to see this is where it was meant to be all along. So thank you. I'd love to hear from Scott and Zia, anything that stood out or for you or that you related to.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, as even though I'm not a South Asian woman, I did grow up with South Asian parents, and sometimes there's a stigma with, what the expectation is, especially if your parents were, immigrants as mine were. So to have somebody say is an incredible thing to help people realize, and then to coach them toward, first of all, identify that where your aspirations maybe came from were from values that were not your own, is an incredible thing to help people realize, and then to coach them toward figuring out what their values are, what they truly stand for, and being able to turn that into actual, whether it's better job satisfaction or a higher salary. What a gift to give people. So thank you very much for your work.
Yeah, agreed. Your story is very inspirational and really compelling. I'm curious, as you started out, it sounded that you connected with somebody who gave you sort of guidance on the health path. And then you were able to put attention, if I'm remembering what you said right, toward resumes and then growing it out. I think I've seen people in my life or in my circles try to do that, try to reinvent essentially by saying, oh, well, I like to do this thing, and then I'm going to start to do it for these different people. So I'm curious if you have another, like an example or a technique that you use to sort of go from, I'm going to help a couple people to now this is what I'm doing, like whether it's, I don't know, just a mindset or actual outreach, or how did you sort of get over that? Because I've seen too many people stumble, but I'm extremely compelled that you had made it? You did.
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for all the kind words. One of the things that I realized in my own journey, and which is what I teach my clients also, is number one, to get clear on what they truly want. And really, we all know what we want. We just don't give us the time to really think about it. We don't give us the time. We just brush over it. Many times our soul is telling us, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to do. But what we do is, but I have to take care of the paychecks, right? I have to take care of all these other things. And then we just douse that voice that is coming and guiding us. We just suppress that. So if we can just sit and allow ourselves to be guided, the answers are within us. So what I basically do is, I ask questions of my client, right, to help them get more clarity. And I use career as the medium to get there. Really, as clients work with me, they figure out. So for example, I had one client, she thought she was the director and she thought the next level was either become a VP or get into the C-suite. But as we worked together, she realized that all she wanted to do was help women in their 20s to really start living their lives fully. So now she's become a coach instead of going to the C-suite because she would be miserable there. That's not what her heart wanted. But we all know our answers and we need someone from outside to look at us because we have blinders on our face, right? So we don't see us as clearly as someone else could see us.
Yeah. And I really like that bit of your story when you were saying, like, as a physician and working with people from low income homes, you did find that place where it could be tangible for them. Taking a walk, it's absolutely free. Because I realize sometimes when we talk about these things, first off, how fortunate I am and how fortunate we are that we could say, I'm not happy with the place that I'm at in my life and something needs to change. And yes, will we perhaps take a financial hit? For sure. I've recently, at least, never had the fear that means I'm going to be destitute and out on the street. And there are others that are not that fortunate.
Right. That is so true. That is so true.
Yeah. So even that bit of service that you did was really inspiring as well. So now let's talk about Zia. First, a little bit about you. Zia Hassan is a certified life and engagement coach who helps people reinvent their careers. He lives outside of Washington, D.C. Whenever you're ready, Zia, would love to hear your story.
Yeah, that is a small step into the pool that is my interesting history. It's interesting to me, but that may be because it's me. We'll see. I have always been a person with a variety of interests, from music to engineering to science to whatever it is you could put in front of me. One of my favorite quotes from The Wonder Years, this TV show, The Wonder Years from, I think it was back in the 80s. There's an episode where Kevin, the main character who's a young boy, goes to his piano lesson and ends up quitting piano in this episode and says something to the effect of, when we're kids, we have all these things we're interested in, and growing up is the process of letting each one of those go. Well, I refused to let each one of those go, even down to sitting in this recording studio where I've been recording and writing music since I was 7 years old. And so I'm 37. So that's 30 years of writing and recording music and not giving up on doing that. I have given up on trying to be, someone who is a successful touring artist or sell 1 million records or something, like get signed to a label. But anyway, all of these interests I had growing up, the messaging that I was given was, you have to pick one lane, pick one of these things and really go for it, because you're spreading yourself too thin, is the thing that I used to hear. And so reinvention in this topic has always been really fascinating to me, because I feel like in every endeavor, I'm constantly reinventing myself. My history kind of started when I was 7, when I wrote my first song and realized the power of what it means to create something, to make something. But then when I got to college, I started developing this love for programming and creating things on computers, which at the time, not a lot of people had those skills. So I ended up making something, just as I would make a song. I made a computer app for the department that I worked at when I was in college. I was a senior, I was an RA, and I made this whole system for them because everything was paper-based. And so when I realized that could be a lucrative career and everybody was telling me, oh, this is really cool, you should try and pursue this, I ended up getting a job with IBM right after college. And that was where I kind of hit a snag for the first time in my life, because IBM, for 8 hours a day, my job was to do a specific thing, sit at a desk, butts in seats, as they would say, managers walking around making sure you're working, that sort of thing. It just did not vibe with what I thought my life was going to be. It felt like all these wide open paths, these different types of potential, the way that I would switch and do different things all the time throughout my entire life, suddenly was just narrowed into this one tiny little path. And even though there was this moment of coming home at the end of the day, and I still would do creative things and I would write and it would still be exciting, it was still really hard to make that work and have all that come together in a way that actually made my life complete. So at some point I decided, let's see if I can switch my career. And I was really nervous about this because I wanted to be a teacher. Everything I enjoyed about what I did at IBM was teaching people to do things. So I became a teacher. And I thought, let me be passionate. Let me follow my passion. That was my mantra at the time. And I still remember sitting down with my boss and he was saying, well, you're leaving us. And I said, yeah, you got to do what you're passionate about. You got to follow your passion. Later on, realizing that I had never taught anybody. I'd never taught a child before. So I didn't really know if I was passionate about it. I knew that I loved telling people how to do things, but would I enjoy this profession of teaching? And so it was a big pay cut going from a consultant to be an elementary school teacher, especially the first year because I was training and I was on a tiny AmeriCorps budget, essentially. And so I was a teacher and learned the hard way that that doing something that you're not passionate about, which was my IBM life, can be a great way to figure out, what to do in your spare time to satisfy those values, those core values that you have. But then also on the other side, doing something that you're really passionate about, which teaching ended up being a very passionate job for me, can drain you. It can put you in a position where you are thinking about your job 24/7 and all you ever think about is your students. And there were weddings that I missed. There were big life events that I missed as a result of being a teacher and trying to fit all of that into my life. And anybody who's listening who is a teacher can tell you, or was a teacher, can tell you that becomes really, really tricky. So I started drawing some inspiration. I started thinking to myself, what could I do to widen what it means to be a teacher? And this is where the idea of reinvention came in once again. It started once with this idea of I want to be a teacher. I want to reinvent myself in that way. I like training people, so let me be a teacher. Now, after doing it, being passionate about it, letting it kind of overtake my entire life, it was the idea of how do I reinvent myself again? And I asked myself, what does being a teacher really mean to me? Is it the job description of standing in front of kids every day and teaching? As looking up teacher online, that's what you'll find. Or is it that I have a particular skill in creating an environment that allows people to learn for themselves, which is what I ended up learning how to do as a teacher. There's no transmission of knowledge. I'm creating this environment for people. And I watched my creative friends reinvent themselves over the years. Many people that I became friends with through my music life had reinvented themselves many times. They would be someone who was on stage, but then they'd be someone who was behind the stage. They'd be someone who was writing scripts. And they would constantly be thinking about what does it mean to express myself creatively? And so I decided I'm going to go and try to do something completely different, trying to blend these two things together. And I wanted to be someone who worked with educators, but in the context of technology. So those two jobs kind of put together. And I knew I didn't want to have a class of children anymore because while I loved working with kids, it really takes over your entire life and can become quite toxic, not because of the children, but because of the structure of how school is set up, especially here in America, but I'm sure in various places around the world. And so I started training people in education to use technology, specifically with Microsoft. That was where my contract was. I was a contractor with them, I still am. But then I started thinking to myself, I've gone through this so many times and I'm still having this messaging from my parents, from friends and family of when are you going to settle down and actually pick something? You've changed your direction so many times. When are you just going to pick something and just go all the way with it? You're never going to make, the type of money that someone could make if they stuck with something. If you had stuck with consulting for a long time, you could be making a lot of money right now, but you switched. Oh, if you stuck with teaching for a long time, maybe you could have made your way up to administrator level, but you switched, you did something else. So when are you going to pick something? And it suddenly occurred to me, and I was being coached. I during the pandemic, through my training job, became an adjunct professor at a local college here, and I teach child development to future teachers, which I love because it's a light workload compared to my previous job. And through that, joined their coaching program. And so I got trained as an ICF certified life coach and engagement coach to help people kind of change the way that they think and then move toward whatever goal they set. And my niche happens to be helping people reinvent their careers. Okay, I sort of took the meta route. I went from this moment of thinking, okay, I've gone through all these different careers, different ideas, and I realized I am a multi-potentialite. Like, it's been in front of me this entire time that there is no end to this. This is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. I'm going to be changing what I do. I'm going to be creating new things. And if I ever get stuck in something for maybe more than 4 or 5 years, I'm going to get that nagging feeling. And that nagging feeling is so important to not ignore, because in every one of these situations, I left when it was a little bit too late, when that nagging had gotten a little bit beyond the point of nagging and to the point of like screaming in my ear. And I'm just sort of thinking like, no, I got to stay the course. I got to keep going. I got to keep moving forward with this. And so I now have been doing a lot more coaching with clients. A lot of them are former teachers. I think that they relate to me and I relate to them, but not all of them are. Nowadays, I'm expanding who I work with. And I resume and cover letter work is sort of like the strategic stuff that Mrinalini, that you were talking about doing. It sounds like you and I do similar type things in our coaching life. And that strategic cover letter resume stuff is sort of like the second step to first figuring out, what are my values? What do I stand for? And what's in my way? What's that negative self-talk that's in my ear that maybe was imposed by a parent or a friend or a colleague that is now sort of the soundtrack in my head that I don't really agree with, but has taken over as like, oh, well, I guess that's what I got to do. I got to pick my lane. I got to pick what I got to do. And so I now help people overcome that. I help them figure out, first of all, what's really important to me. And a lot of times when I work with people, they immediately figure out that the things they thought were important are actually not that important to them. We go through kind of these 3 different areas, 3 different buckets. We talk about people they admire, because that often agrees with your core values when you admire somebody. Things that irritate you or bother you are rubbing against your core values, so we look at it from that angle. And then things that bring you flow or joy, when you get lost in something that you do, there's a very good chance that's agreeing with your core value. If I were to ask someone on the street, what are your core values? It's likely that they'd either say, I'm not really sure, or they'd have a little bit of an idea, but until you actually do the digging, and I do a long process with each one of my clients, it's the very first thing we do when I enroll a new client, is we figure out through that process, we get a list. And even from that list, we cultivate it even more and say, what needs to be on here that's missing? And what's on here that maybe is redundant or repetitive? And so the idea of reinventing yourself, I think all comes down to first understanding, it's just like Mrinalini said earlier, that the answers are within us. And if you go to my website, you'll see a lot of this language, that the answers are already within us. It's kind of like we have a dusty compass, and learning to dust off that compass is a really important skill for everyone to learn how to do. And for me, someone like me, I have to continually dust off that compass. And I even have a quiz. If you go to my website, I have a quiz where you can actually answer just like 5 or 6 questions, and the quiz will tell you exactly what your stuck point is, exactly how to start polishing off your compass. ziahassan.coach/quiz, you can take that. But I think this idea of reinvention for me has all come down to the idea that for some people, it's not necessarily about reinventing yourself once and then it's over. I know, even though I've just reinvented myself again this year, that I'm going to be reinventing myself again in 5 or 6 years. I'm already ready for it. I'm already thinking about it. And when I get that little inkling of what is next for me, I write it down. I keep it ready. I don't necessarily act on it immediately, but I make sure that I'm honoring that voice that comes in that's saying, hey, something new is coming up for you. Something new that you need to make or be or inspire people to do is coming up for you. Honor that, be with that. And then at some point, I will find a way to integrate that, right? I have to be patient with how this manifests in my life. So for anybody that's out there that's thinking it's too challenging to reinvent myself, I don't really understand where to start, there is a very simple first step. And it could be for you talking to someone about what's really important to you. It could be journaling or reflecting. It could be working with a coach like me, Mrinalini, or even reading some of Scott's poems and being inspired or listening to other episodes. There are many ways to start. But that first step of not ignoring that voice, listening to a little bit of what it's saying is where I would begin.
I'm so jazzed up. I feel like I just got a mini coaching session, Zia. Thank you so much. I'm going to go take your quiz. after we're done with this.
Let me know what
also,
you got.
why are you all so damn impressive? I feel like this, right? Man, let's see. What did I write down here? First of all, I've actually never heard multi-potentialite before. I've never heard that word. Is
There's
it
a
real
book. No.
Okay.
I was in a coaching session because all coaches, I believe, should have their own coaches. If you value it enough to sell it. I have a number of coaches that I work with, and someone said to me, "Have you ever read this book?" Because I was like, I have to pick what I want to do. They're like, "You ever read this book? It's about, I forget, it's called How to Be Everything." It's a book that outlines different structures of how you can be a multi-potentialite. Some people make it all in one career and one job. Some people have different part-time jobs. Like there's different structures.
I also had a similar experience where people were always telling me you have to pick one thing. You're spreading yourself too thin. You're never going to accomplish if you keep on jumping around. And even if you think about it, when you're on an interview, you're not in a certain place for a certain amount of time, like as indicated on your resume. It's frowned upon. People are like, well, what happened? You don't have any sense of like commitment. But personally, and it sounds like for all of us, we're very curious and we just want to continue to learn. And when you learn that knowledge, while it's super helpful, it's not sufficient because you have to take that knowledge and then what do you do with it? How do you actually incorporate it into your being? I also really appreciated you mentioning how when you became a teacher that you were doing something that you were passionate about, but that it was draining you.
Yeah.
And I think about, I went to college for theater. I have this BFA from a prestigious program. I'm not some famous actor today. Sometimes I think about other things like my personality type and the experiences that I've had. And I'm like, would that have actually been good for me? That's a little bit more on like a faith side of things, like the universe and what led me to this place and higher power and all that. But what if you had gotten that one thing and didn't explore all these other avenues? Like, where would you be at today? So I really appreciated you bringing that up. And what does it mean to express myself creatively?
Yeah. It
doesn't have to show one format.
Yes.
So many other ways.
The thing that you hit on there that's so important is intuition. And you phrased it as, how did the universe bring me to this particular moment? What if it had been some other way? It's all how we make sense of the story. It's all how we make sense of the breadcrumbs. I think that's what intuition comes down to. And that is a skill that you have to practice.
For sure. And it isn't for me personally with the exploration of why did I go to school for theater? I had never acted before in my life. Why did I choose to spend all that money and get a BFA, right? And it's like, oh, I did that because I wanted to be everything. And now I've just learned there are ways for me to be a lot of different things. Maybe not everything that you can in the world of theater, but I could still go do theater and be those other things. So thank you so much. I'd love to hear from Mrinalini.
What jumped at me was, first of all, I relate to, how your parents asking you, when are you going to settle? You're doing all these things, but when will you have a real job? And I mean, their concern is real for them because that's what they have seen, right? To get into a job and be in that job forever, get promoted. So I applaud you, first of all, for standing up for yourself and believing in yourself that, you know what? I hear you, I see you, but this is my path. It takes a lot of courage. It's not easy to stay on your path. And you're so young. So I really applaud you for that. And then the other thing is that you're being true to yourself. You accepted that you are a multi-potentialite and you are just being true to that. You're not fighting it. You're not struggling. You're just, this is who I am. And you know what? In a couple of years, if I feel like I'm getting nudged to do something else, I'm going to do it. And the best part about everything that you have shared is now you're using your own experience to help others find that joy in their career, figure out what is it that they would love to do, get that clarity. So it's all of it, the whole package is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Agreed. And I like the word clarity that you're saying, Mrinalini, that resonates for me. And I'm going to pick on one detail that you said, Zia, that I have a question about because I've had that sort of like that whisper experience that you mentioned, like the future or something that I'm going to want to honor later. And then I write it down and then I lose it. It's on a napkin that is now somewhere else. So I'm actually just, when you said that, I'm curious, do you have any tricks?
Yes.
Do you have any, do you have a play?
Oh, yeah.
How do you deal with, what do you do with the whisper? Would you share with us?
This could be a whole other episode because I'm obsessed with productivity systems. But The app that I recommend, if you're interested in taking the dive, is called, it's an iPhone app. So I don't know if you have an iPhone, but it's called Drafts.
I do.
And Drafts is an app. You open many note-taking apps, you open the app and you hit plus and you do all these things. When you hit Drafts, immediately you're presented with a screen to write on, and then you decide where the writing goes. And you can define these custom actions. This sounds a lot more complicated than it actually is. You can define these custom actions, and I put them into another app called OmniFocus. That's also another Mac. I'm a big Mac user, Apple user. And OmniFocus is kind of like the Lamborghini of task managers. Not everybody needs it, but if you like your ride smooth, OmniFocus. And so it allows you to slice things up into different categories. So anyway, my point is that I have systems in place. I review weekly. I also journal using an app called Day One that lets me see the last 20 years actually of journal entries. Every day I see the last 20 years of my life, which is pretty cool on that day. And then another app that I've been using lately called Obsidian that connects different ideas together through tagging and through what is called note linking. So you link different notes together, and then there's a visual graph where you can see all the notes and how they connect. Of course, I know this could be a whole podcast episode in and of itself.
Love this.
But that is what I do every time I have that idea. But I will say this, I used to walk around with a stack of index cards in my pocket for like 10 years because there was no app that did what I needed it to do. A space pen and a stack of note cards. And every new idea, I'd put a note card and I'd bring it home at the end of the day and I'd go through that pile at the end of the week and I would throw away things and I would put things in little categories like this I want to do someday. And when a new project was finished, I just reach in and pull out another one. So
this was awesome. Thank you so much for this. All right, super fun rapid fire questions. Each of you will have the opportunity to go first, so nobody get too comfortable. First question goes to Scott. What's the best meal you have ever had, either because of the food itself, the company you were with, or the experience of it?
Lasagna at True Food Kitchen because it's amazing. And every time I think, I don't like lasagna, and I order it anyway because my wife says, you loved it last time, get it again.
Love it. Love it. Zia, what about you?
I think it would have to be the best meal I've ever had was McDonald's from a drive-thru at 10 p.m. at night after flying home from Tucson. My son had emergency surgery and we had to like rush home recently. And it was a very harrowing and hard day. We both forgot to eat. So in recent memory, that's the one where it was just like, wow, it's just like McDonald's, but it was so good to just have something in your mouth at the end of that very long, harrowing day.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope your son is okay.
Yes, he's fine now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Mrinalini?
What I can think of is homemade pancake with my 4-year-old. The way he eats pancake, actually some of his veggies also, the attention that he gives to it and the way he enjoys and the look on his face, I have learned to enjoy my food looking at him, learning from him. So every Sunday, we have pancake time and we both love having it.
Oh, my toddler just shovels food in her mouth. That's so awesome. I don't know where she got that from, maybe watching her parents. But also, do you notice all three of us have toddlers?
Oh,
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
My daughter just turned 4. 2 weeks ago.
They're
And
all
Zia,
similar
you have a
ages.
3-year-old and an infant, right?
And a 4-month-old.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And I have a 2-year-old.
I have a 4, yeah.
We could start our own little support group here.
Right.
Yeah.
Parents of toddlers.
Be a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I know, right? Don't tempt me. Zia, what's a popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
Oh man, that's a good one. I think a popular opinion that most people have that I don't agree with. It's the idea of manners, actually. But I mean that in the sense of people are always like, it's good to have manners. I actually don't agree with that because I think that a lot of manners and a lot of things that we do are just because the person before us did it. Holding the door for somebody is wonderful to do functionally, and so I will always do that. Those sorts of manners I'm not against. But it's like when you know, like setting the table and like putting a knife in this particular spot and putting a fork in this particular spot. I'm always like, it's just something that we invented. It's like fashion. It's not real, and we're holding ourselves to this standard that I think is kind of silly.
Great. I'm all for it. Mrinalini?
Meditation is great for stress. I mean, it's very popular. It does help, but most people don't realize that it helps only temporarily. Really, what we have to understand is understand where that stress is coming from and get rid of the root cause. Otherwise, it's going to come back and you'll keep meditating for your whole life and you will never get rid of the stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, what about you? A popular opinion most people have that you don't agree with?
First of all, Mrinalini, thank you. That just was such a good light bulb for me about meditation.
You're like, I'm done with it.
I've never accomplished it. And I'm always like, oh man, if I could just do the meditation, I would be so much less stressed. But the way you phrased that, I was like, no, I wouldn't. But that's great. I'll just keep doing my walks. And I appreciate that perspective that you just gave. A popular opinion, the first one, work-life balance, that is a goal. And it sort of applies across the board as well. But basically the idea that there's a work-life balance, that should mean that everything should always feel balanced. I just disagree. I don't think anything really works that way. There's the ebb and flow. I'm seeing it now. All of us would probably agree, like with a toddler, like there is no especially now with the poetry and doing creative work, like there are days where it's just, this is a massive 12-hour day, and then the next 3 days, like the balance might come that the next 3 days are lower expectations of myself because my internal is rebalancing. But that one right there, like the idea that every day should somehow have an equal balance of work and life, that there even is, that's doable or desirable. Having let go of that has been good. So I don't believe in that one.
Yeah. I think we do ourselves a disservice too when we're constantly striving for it, because it makes us feel like we're doing something wrong that we cannot achieve it. And I've never achieved it. It's right up there with perfectionism.
I like the word work-life integration more than work-life balance.
Yeah, for sure. Then you can always be yourself too. All right. So next one starts with Mrinalini.
I'm stressed.
Mrinalini. What piece of art, book, music, movie, whatever, has had a profound impact on you?
Bollywood music. That gives me joy. I love to sing. And Asha Bhosle is one of my very favorite singers. And I sing all her songs. I put her on the pedestal. I worship her. And it's just... Yeah, I just love Bollywood music. And the great part about it is that it has a song for every damn situation in life, whether you have borrowed money from people and you have to return it, whether you're like everything. And I use it for my lives that I do. Every Saturday, I start my lives with a Bollywood song and then I do my thing, talk about career and all of that, and end with a Bollywood song. So
Nice. Sounds like theater. Scott, what about you?
The thing that popped into my head was white noise. So I'm a huge music lover. I love listening to like EDM and just like no lyric music when I work and when I run or bike or swim, whatever. But when my wife had our baby, my hours were incredibly irregular and my brain was all over the place. And I discovered white noise to put on, or pink noise, or all the different static sounds that was supposed to help with the baby sleeping. But what happened is I would have her sleeping next to me, and that would be when I could work, catch up on email or something. And I discovered like, oh, wow, this is so calming for my brain, and it puts me in the zone. And I had just never done it before. So I've continued to, she doesn't need any more to sleep, but I've continued to use it as when my brain is out of control, rather than giving it a thing to latch onto, which is what I used to do. Now I give it static to sort of float within. And it's continues to be super effective.
It's awesome. What about you?
I just want to quickly say that I also experienced that. I still sleep with white noise as a result of having used it for my kids. Asha Bhosle, amazing, influential, incredible. So I just relate to both of those. I'm going to add to this because we all have toddlers. I bet you know this show, Bluey, has really, honestly, has had a profound impact on the way that I think about being a parent. For those who have not seen the show, I actually have on my podcast an episode where I break down from a developmental perspective the beauty of how the parents are on the show with their kids, how they teach lessons, how they play with the kids, the evidence of the types of expectations they've set up with their kids. Every single episode has a gem in it that if you are a parent of young children, you will walk away. If you just write something down, like one lesson you learned, and try and implement it, it will change the way that you see parenting.
Which streaming service is it on?
I think Disney Plus has all the episodes, though YouTube, I think, has some for free. Watch the episode Keepy Uppy and Magic Xylophone. Those are two of my favorites that will really just like leave you just kind of like, I think it left me totally breathless at the end. So
anything that will get my child away from Cocomelon.
Yes. Oh yeah. No, it's there. This is a show. This is a show that is a masterclass in parenting, and kids also love it.
Yeah, we had her like off of it for a while. Like she went on to Octonauts, which is much more fun because you learn about all these sea creatures. And now it's just JJ.
Bluey will be her new obsession. It's got a raving fan base.
Good to know. All right, we're back to Scott. What's your favorite thing about yourself?
What's my favorite thing about myself? I love that I'm not a perfectionist. So does that count?
Yeah.
It shows up in my poetry. It makes my poetry possible because I'm like, just jump in. But I love that. I have a lot of anxiety and tics and phobias and things but it's the perfectionism is not one of them. And I like that allows me to sort of let things go and relax at the end of the day. I can put it down and fall asleep.
Teach me. Zia, what's your favorite thing about yourself?
I live and die by my systems. And that used to be something I was embarrassed by. People found it really geeky. But in my house, we have an issue with our dishwasher. None of us like to unload it. I don't know if you've ever experienced that feeling. No one's ever experienced that. No. We hate it. So I built a little app through the Shortcuts app on the iPhone, where every time we run the dishwasher, we press the button and it checks the last person who did it and texts both of us to say, in the next 24 hours, it's this person's turn to unload the dishwasher. And it keeps things equitable in terms of the chores in our house. We have systems for all sorts of other things too. But it's one of those things where like, that's pretty geeky. But my goodness, does it change the dynamic in terms of the balance of duties?
I love it. I love it. Please send it to me.
Oh, sure.
Please. Okay. Awesome. I'm also a processes geek.
Okay.
You can't argue with data, all right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's your turn, it says.
But is there a way to measure the weight of each duty? Because I think some things are bigger than, oh my gosh.
You do?
Of course you do.
You can download the PDF I wrote about this weekly meeting template I have with my wife where we discuss this exact thing because it's a qualitative thing. It's not something you have to discuss and say what feels right. And that's a whole other podcast. But I'll leave you at that.
To this day, this is super heteronormative, I realize. But if the one that identifies as the mother is nursing, then the one that identifies as the non-nursing parent has to change all the diapers.
Agreed.
Every single one of them.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Mrinalini, what about you? What's your favorite thing about yourself?
What I like about myself is that I'm really chilled. Even if I don't have any information of how things are going to be, what's the next step, I just do it. I don't care because I know that I'll find out when I do it. So I don't ever stop myself trying new things, whether it's trying foods, trying things for my business, trying different strategies with my clients, whatever it is, I just do it.
Nice. Last question goes to Zia first. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I think I'm gonna circumvent this question. It's not advice, it's a principle, which is that everybody else's advice is a projection of their own values. And understanding your values allows you to give yourself advice in a way that actually will benefit you. It's not to say that advice from other people will never make an impact on your life. Of course it will, but it's a little bit of a crapshoot. And if you are constantly in the mode of taking other people's advice, then you'll learn to live by other people's values. So I think discovering your own values, which is to work with a coach like either of us to figure out what your values are, that would be the best advice I could give anybody.
Love it.
So for me, one of my uncles actually said this to me. I know we as children had gone to see a live cricket match, and we got a seat in the box where all the players come and sit, and we as kids had this autograph book and we took it and wanted an autograph from every single player. And my uncle said this is great that you're taking somebody else's autographs, but build your life such that others will come and ask for an autograph for you. So I don't care if people come to me for an autograph or not, but I just want to live my life with the success that I define for myself.
Yep. Absolutely.
I like that. Mine, the one that comes to mind is you are the context of your life, not the content of your life. It was said to me by one of my teachers. His name is Jose Luis Stevens. And, he said it's an idea that is present in many spiritual traditions. But when he said that to me, that's always stuck with me. So that's been really good to just think of how am I the context of my life rather than the content, things that I do. That one has changed how I think about what I'm going to put my attention on or where I'm going to be and how I'm going to spend my day.
Beautiful. I love it. Thank you so
Love
much,
it.
everyone. That's where we wrap up, where we end. Well, there you have it, fellow travelers. I'm really curious to hear from you all about the reinventions in your life and the ways that you have reconciled them for yourself and reconciled them to the identity or the identities that you have identified with throughout your lifetime. I mentioned in this episode that I was an actor and I've had a lot of shame around not pursuing that in the way that most actors do, which is to just like, I've got this love of the craft and it's all that I'm going to do and I'm going to audition all the time. And I was always like, I don't understand. I kind of want like this more full life and I want to explore this and I want to explore that. And then I realized that my acting was my way of doing that. Because I was such a curious person, I wanted to be everything. And I thought that the only way that you could do that was through the theater. But now I can say that I do truly live my life in a way that allows me to evolve and develop based on my curiosities. And I hope that's something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. So inspired by these three guests today and so many takeaways and so many people and books and apps that I need to look into, obviously. We will have all of them in the show notes as well as how you can contact all of these people. Check us out, check out the show notes. And also, this is the very last episode of season 2. I'm stoked. I'm so stoked that I really hope that you all loved this season as much as I do. And please subscribe or follow The Way Station on Spotify and Apple so that you can learn when season 3 is going to come out, because we are already going to get going on season 3. As always, you can follow us on our social media at The Way Station Pod on Instagram, at, I just realized we're going to be on YouTube and I haven't said that for any of these. But you know what? If people are watching YouTube, then they know where to go because they're already on us. So yeah, follow us there. Follow us on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and all of this information will be in the show notes because I just don't feel like saying it right now. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next season. Mrinalini.
Mrinalini.
Yeah, Mrinalini.
Yeah.
Mrinalini. Waukesha, Wisconsin. Is that right? Waukesha. Mrinalini.
That was perfect.
Mrinalini.
Mrinalini.
Mrinalini. Oh, gosh. Mrinalini.
you want me to say?
Mrinalini.
Mrinalini.
When